Hello everyone, welcome back to another video. In this video, we're gonna go over some fun ways to mix skin tone. I've learned a couple of cool ways to mix skin tones over my journey to becoming an artist, and mostly portrait artist. My main goal this year was to get better at painting faces, and during that time I've learned what I like about painting faces in gouache and watercolor and what I didn't like, and during that time I've learned how I would like to paint skin tones. For right now, I've learned this cool easy way, which is just using any red, yellow, and blue that you have available. The three colors I had available were my Holbein gouache before I added to my collection, and the ones that I used was flame red, permanent yellow, and an ultramarine blue. And together they can make various different skin tones, and you can also throw in your white to lighten up your skin tones as well. Throughout my skin tone painting journey, my main goal was to learn how to paint darker skin tones. I feel like, at least in my corner of the internet, there wasn't so much traditional artists painting darker skinned people, and I wanted to paint people that looked like me. And so my main project for myself was to teach myself how to paint darker skin tones. And I want to make it easy for everyone to be able to paint darker skin tones, or any skin tone that you might be interested in painting. And I feel like this is a good foundational set if you're willing to kind of, experiment and have some fun with it too. Not every mix is gonna look the same, and I hope that in your journey of mixing skin tones, you have fun with it and it doesn't feel like an impossible thing to achieve. I also want this video to be fun, relaxing, and just very chill, so I hope you're grabbing your paintbrushes and your paint and having fun with me. So right now I'm showing you how I mix skin tones using white, and also just the same three basic colors. So you want to use white to lighten up the mixes that you've made. You can also use red and white and then maybe add a bit of yellow, or start with red and white and add a bit of blue, depending on what you're looking for in your skin tones. When I first start mixing skin tones, I always think about what I want my undertones to look like, and that's what I start my mixing with. So if I want a peachy, soft undertone, then maybe I'll start with my red and yellow. If I want a more muted, cooler skin tone, maybe closer to gray, then I will start with my blue, and sometimes I'll add in that yellow if you want that darker, greener undertone. I think undertones are an important part when it comes down to mixing skin tones, because not all of our skin is the same color or the same undertones. So when you have a lot of different colors, it can make the painting look very interesting too. And before we continue, we just have to take a brief moment to admire my cat Buttons. Okay, let's get back into it. So I think the main part of mixing skin tones is practicing. I have practiced mixing many different skin tones, and I am still learning, and sometimes I make mistakes, like this mistake right here. I went way too gray in my skin tone mix, so I added lots of red to make it more purplish, and I felt like I was able to achieve that. But definitely mixing lighter skin tones is something that I need to practice more on and incorporate more into my artwork as well. The second idea, which is kind of very similar to the first, is buying a basic set. So I bought the basic M. Graham and Co. gouache set, and you can make many cool skin tones with just those basic colors plus your white. The next way to mix skin tones is adding another fun color to that base set that you had, which is your burnt umber. I feel like burnt umber is a very solid color to add into your skin tone mixes, especially if you're looking to mix darker skin tones, I feel like that's a very good base to start with. And then you can add your red to make it more warmer. You can add your blue to make it more cooler or darker. Their possibilities are endless. And surprisingly enough, or maybe not so surprisingly enough, they look very similar to the mixes you get when you just have those three colors plus white. So don't feel like you have to rush out right now and pick up some burnt umber. Most likely you already have it in your set and you just haven't utilized it yet. And although taking your time and having fun and mixing different skin tones could seem like a lot of work, which it is, I don't want you all to get stuck with just doing this part and not doing anything else. It's very important to use what we have in our heads and what we practice in our sketchbooks or on scrap piece of paper and use it in our final paintings. That is how we're gonna get the results and figure out what works and what doesn't work and how we can tweak things up and how we can continue to get the same results that we want every single time. Now here's where the fun begins. So when I was doing a little experimenting with just two colors, my turquoise blue and gouache and my orange and gouache, I believe the orange is Brilliant Orange from Holbein, and I was experimenting just using those two colors plus white, and I discovered that you can get really great warm, dark, and light skin tones from both of those colors combined. And depending if you add white or don't add white or add more orange, the possibilities seem pretty endless. I mean, I know it has its limitations because it is a limited palette, but if you are looking at the colors that you have available to you and you only have those two gouache paints and you want to try this out, go for it. I found that it was very fun and maybe even could help you have a cohesive watercolor or gouache palette if that's what you're looking for. I do have one tip for you, just in case you use gouache in a similar way that I do. If you water down your gouache, you might see a lot more granulation because ultramarine blue is a granulating color. And if you want a flat, skin tone layer, you want to make sure you're using a lot of paint instead of watering it down. That way you see a lot less granulation. The next way that I've experimented making skin tones is using the Zoran palette. So the Zoran palette is a palette that is a limited palette based on the artist Zoran. I'm not going to say his full name because I don't want to butcher it, but basically you're using yellow ochre, cad red, titanium white, and ivory black. And I've started to move away from using ivory black in my artwork. So another alternative that I did add to my palette was Payne's Gray. And I actually really, really love how this palette turned out with Payne's Gray. And if you wanted to, opt out of using ivory black, I know some artists avoid using that color, and you want to use the Zoran palette with just Payne's Gray, I think it would look really amazing. I thought it, for me at least, it looked very warm. Like my colors came out very warm and almost like green leaning, so maybe that's something to also look out for. But if you mix red into any of your color mixes, I think it would end up balancing it out like how I was able to balance it out as well. But I really did love how the little paint swatches turned out, and I did a little comparison side to side to see what Payne's Gray will look like next to ivory black. So the first one is ivory black, the second one is Payne's Gray. And ultimately, I think all these swatches look very similar to each other. Here's a look at what I tried many months ago when I did the whole mixing my own skin tones with gouache thing before I moved on to watercolors. Speaking of my watercolors, I have my very small palette of watercolors that I primarily use to mix my skin tones with. So one side has the primary color sets from Daniel Smith, and the other side are a mix of different colors that I talk about in my Back to Watercolor episode, and what I soon hope to update you guys on later of paints that I've added to my palette to help me mix non-granulating skin tones. But I did do an oopsie and I did buy Daniel Smith transparent brown oxide, and I didn't realize that it is actually a granulating color before I ran out and bought it. So I don't know how or what I'm going to do with this color, because I do think I can get very, very dark skin tones with that I've been struggling with my other main palette. This palette, which is my main palette, is very good at getting like warm, toasty skin tones, but I struggle with really getting darker skin tones, and I thought transparent brown oxide was gonna be that powerhouse that I needed, but ultimately it is granulating, and I do not want a granulating color in my skin tone mixes. So I'm still debating whether or not I want to leave it in there, but for now it's gonna hang out with me until I can decide if it's granulating enough to stay. That's why I recommend using what you have and not going out to buy new colors right away, because as you can see, a lot of these swatches are very similar to each other, and I think that with just a little bit of practice, we can make what we have available to us work to our best benefit. And when it doesn't, we look for that one color that does fit into our watercolor palette or our gouache palette. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you had fun and learned something today. Thank you, and I'll see you all in the next one. Bye. Take care.